we've got one pond to sample here. The first step is always to clear one of these metal cage zones, which we've installed for sampling in, to avoid taking the samples in a shaded place, for example. So we take all the duckweed, for example, off here, or if there's lots of algae just covering the top, we clear those out. These leftovers here were for periphyton sampling. We're not doing that today, but at times when we do that, just pull it up, take a clip off the bottom and put it in a little 50ml Falcon tube, and then take that in for sampling according to the description that Steve left us. After doing that, it's good to leave the pond a little bit because we've just disturbed the water for everything to settle a bit before taking any measurements, which gives us time to set up our meters for measuring things. So this is our pH meter, which measures pH, conductivity and solubles in the water, but that's almost the same as conductivity, so not that relevant. The probe is always in a storage solution. When storing it after use, it's always important to make sure that there's actually liquid in here to protect the probe. There is a bottle, well, there's this Falcon tube with storage solution, and then there's also a bottle to top up the Falcon tube if that ever runs empty. So to start using it, we take off this cap, which is always a bit messy. There's always a salt crust forming on the top. That's normal because this is quite a high salt solution. So we'll take that off. Then we want to give it a rinse. So we give this a little clean, try and get the salt crust off. With our old water or deionized water, or we have on occasion used borehole water when we forgot to bring the deionized water, which works as well but isn't as ideal. So then we want to calibrate this. So obviously we need to turn it on, so we press the on-off button, and then the screen will tell us what to do for calibration. So it says press calibrate, to calibrate press mode for 3 seconds, so that's what we do. First pretends to go off, but if you keep pressing it, it goes to cal. So there we are. Now it wants to calibrate pH, it tells us in the top right corner. So we get our pH buffer, again in a little, that's easiest to put this probe in, and we can just get a fresh one every so often, maybe every half year or so. So try and shake off any remaining RO water to not mess up the pH of this. Stick it in, and then this tells us it's recording. It's not stable yet. It can be a bit fickle sometimes, so we want for this to become stable. It says calibrated now. So we press set. Yeah, that's not quite right. It should be showing 7 up here. Sometimes it doesn't quite stabilize immediately because there's little bits of the RO water left on the probe. So we try and mix it around in here a little bit and try with the calibration again. So press this for 3 seconds again until it goes to cal mode. It's recording. Okay, so it has now recorded the calibration for the pH 7 buffer correctly. It's waiting for a pH 4 buffer, which we don't use normally. We just press set and say it's done. So it was okay. You saw that very brief okay for pH 7, so it's calibrated at that one. If we were testing things in a wider range of pHs, it would be good to calibrate with solutions at pH 4 and pH 10 as well. But our ponds aren't that far off, so the pH 7 is fine. By pressing set, we can switch to the different measurements. So that's conductivity in microsiemens up here. So now we can calibrate for the conductivity measurement. Again, briefly giving the probe a quick rinse before shaking off the excess water. Getting our conductivity buffer ready, and then getting this into calibration mode by pressing this for 3 seconds. So that's the conductivity that's expected from the calibration buffer, 1413. We
recording. Hopefully it'll stabilize. Yeah. Try shaking this around in here a little bit for any effects of the water that was on the probe. It's not quite happy. So we didn't get an OK sign, meaning it's not fully calibrated. I'll try mixing it in here again a bit and redo the calibration. This time it's okay. So this often happens that you have to do it twice and you wait for this OK sign. Right, so now this thing is fully calibrated and we can start using it again. So now to take our pH values, we can rest this on the corner of the mesocosm. That works quite well usually. Give this a rinse again in between each pond to not carry over stuff and confuse measurements with remaining water from the previous pond. Stick it in the pond, just so. It doesn't need to go far down. Mix it around a bit to make sure that it's all water from this pond that's covering the probe rather than any of the remaining raw water on the surface. And then either, if you're taking lots of measurements at once, it can be good to just hang this here from this wooden button and leave it to equilibrate for a bit while you get the other meters over, or you can just take the values immediately. The set button allows us to switch between the different measurements it can take, so we get the pH value. Always give it a couple of seconds. It often shows the value from the previous measurement first and then switches to the right one. It gives us a temperature as well, and then we can go to the conductivity in microsiemens and the dissolved particles in parts per million. And that's it. Right, next we're using the fluorometer. So as with the other probes, we'll take off the cap. We've already done that. Give it a quick rinse before first use and in between different ponds. And then stick it in here. Then we turn on this meter by using the power switch, obviously. The others aren't really relevant for us, the battery tests, just if it runs out of battery or not even sure what the battery does. But this one, this dial is important because it gives us 3 different ranges in which we can measure fluorescence values. They have different sensitivities, so the rightmost one that it's on right now is the highest sensitivity. That's good to measure low values of fluorescence. But if we did that before, let's wait until it does it again. When it just shows us 1 point nothing, is when it tells us that actually we're out of the range in which the fluorescence in this pond is too high for the low sensitivity of this range. So we'd want to, that happens occasionally, showing us that really we're at the upper limit of measuring on this range. So we want to move up one range. Most of the time we do our measurements on this medium range. So we're happy with that. Then try to hold it still. These values will always switch around a bit because obviously things sort of move through the zone in which the fluorescence is captured. So this is never quite stable. At some point you just have to pick a value when it doesn't move around too crazily. And once you're happy to pick a value, take out the meter, give it a wash and move on with it. So this is our oxygen meter. To use this, very important first, we need to remove the red nipple that protects the probe inside this when it's not in use. Otherwise you don't get any sensible reading. So we unscrew this cage that's just there to protect the probe when we stick it in somewhere, and then remove this red little thing, so the probe is now exposed, and put the cage back on for protection while we use it. There should be a little sponge inside here, there currently isn't, to keep this moist when it's not in use. It even says it on the red little thing. So we're going to add a little sponge in here now and make sure it's moist when we store it again. And then we can press the on button and get on with